You're on the air. Don't say anything crazy.
Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Brobears Talk. Brobear, welcome to another podcast. It's number 24, and we're going to be discussing all kinds of things in this one. How are you, Brother Bear? How are you?
Oh, I'm tip-top, Brother Bear, and thank you for that exuberant and pleasant welcome to numero 24, numero 24 of Brobears Talk.
24.
24. I couldn't be more excited. Tell me, what are we talking about? What are we doing?
We're talking about pesto and Parmigiano Reggiano, specifically where the cheese comes from and its production process. Only kidding. We're talking about Doge, and more specifically, and no, not more specifically, I would say even broadly, we're talking about the Elon effect. I think Elon Musk is one of those people that 200, 300, 500 years from now will be looking back as a historical figure up there with the likes of Einstein in terms of him being a pioneer, a trailblazer in leading the charge on these really humanitarian, I would almost describe, endeavors. One of them being the huge endeavor of making us a multi-planetary species. And the paradigm shift that's going to come with that cannot be overstated. The second one is accelerating the advent of renewable energy in the realm of cars, and that's being done through the vehicle, the company that is Tesla. And I just think he's a rare breed, to say the least. I think it's amazing what he's doing. And I thought he became very topical, actually, because he was on SNL, Saturday Night Live, yesterday, and he was talking about Dogecoin and how he's pumping that, and we'll go into that later on in this podcast. But it came out as Asperger's. He said he's diagnosed Asperger's, and I don't know if that's news to you, Brother Bear.
That is news to me. I had no idea.
It makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah, I think you know, some of the way that he's communicated before, some of the ways he's spoken online to people, you could infer that he had Asperger's syndrome.
Yeah, his mannerisms are peculiar sometimes, and but he's amazing in many ways. And actually, he had a very funny line, because SNL fundamentally is a comedy show, and I think one of his best lines was something like this. He says, I'm trying to make humanity a multi-planetary species, sending people on massive rockets to Mars. I'm also creating the biggest car company and accelerating the advent of electric vehicles. You weren't really expecting me to be a normal chill dude as well, right?
It's like you've ticked all these insane boxes that far exceed any normal human being, and you actually want this guy to be Mr. Comedian as well.
You want me to be like a normal dude as well? Like, no chance. It takes someone very much out there, someone who doesn't fit the box, to be doing what he's doing. I find it amazing, and Joe Rogan says this over and over again, and I couldn't agree more. It's like, how does he find... It feels like he's got more than 24 hours in a day to do what he does. Because, okay, let's just do a consolidation of the ventures he's on. So SpaceX, Tesla, two biggies. And you've got the Boring Company, you've got Solar City, and you've got Neuralink. And you've got, well, those are the five I know of. So that's insane, and that's one person. And he's orchestrating and coordinating. Now, granted, something like the Boring Company may only take up 1% of his time, but the fact he's able to almost run up and down the levels of these industries, which require a very different skill set and expertise, it's just amazing. He's, I can't speak highly enough of the man, and I think what makes him a beautiful human being as well is his endeavors are truly pure and good. And the reason behind what he's doing is true. I mean, he's even, like I said on previous podcasts, I believe it when he says, I wouldn't mind if Tesla went out of business as long as it meant the advent of the electric vehicle was accelerated. And I think he believes that because he practices what he preaches. From my understanding, he shared the blueprints of the Tesla battery with the likes of the German manufacturers, BMW, Audi, Mercedes. And that just speaks to, I suppose, the magnanimous nature of this man.
I think you said it to me perfectly a few months back, Brother Bear, when you said that he's mission driven, not profit driven.
Yes.
And that resonates with me so much more than, say, a Warren Buffett. Not that I would knock people that are necessarily profit driven, because as a byproduct they can deliver jobs and innovation to society. But certainly by being mission driven, Musk has tapped into a whole sleuth of, well, inventions and exploratory tendencies that I think we neglected as a human race for about 50 years.
Yeah, he feels like a gift from God in a way. Like someone with his abilities, I'm not sure we've seen the like before. And I'm not sure we're going to see the like again for a very, very long time. His ability to orchestrate all of these moving parts and do it well is quite honestly mind-boggling. I know he derives a lot of his logic and ways of working from first principles. I'm dying to find a good book on first principles, yet to find one. But I'm sure the Elon Musk book around Elon Musk and sort of the inner workings of his mind is probably a good starter. But it's something I'm looking to apply in my own life as much as possible. First principles, really stated in its most sort of, I suppose, simple definition, is boiling a problem down to its constituent elements, looking at the variables that constitute an industry, a problem, whatever you're looking at, down almost to their elemental components and boiling them down to irrefutable objective facts. So let me take you through an example, maybe something like Red Bull. Why should we create an energy drink company? Well, people get sleepy sometimes. People do not have enough sleep. People need to work and earn money. They need energy to work and be conscious during that hour and hours of work. There isn't a energy drink company which has tapped into this market though so far effectively. Therefore, it makes sense to tap into this gap, and it's something like that. It's going right back to the very, very basics as to why your product would make sense and ultimately sell and make a profit.
Yeah, so basically breaking something down to its very fundamental units,
Yes.
understanding those very
Yes.
simple forces at work, and then I suppose building that from the ground up.
Exactly, and the better example Elon was trying to give when he was talking about first principles on a chat show of one sort or another, I don't remember which one it was now, but he was talking about how you break down a rocket into its constituent parts. Now he's talking about the elemental material that it takes to build a rocket, the steel, the aluminium, the copper, the fuel, everything that you see in front of you, material, physical rocket, all breaking that down into the components. How much nickel do I need? How much copper do I need? Why do I need this? How often am I going to have to reuse that copper once the engine has run the course and duration of its natural life? How often, like all of these things. And this is why he's a vertically integrated establishment, both in SpaceX and Tesla. What we mean by that is that as far as it's possible, here's the end-to-end process. So the only thing missing, for example, from the Tesla production line is actually extraction of the minerals themselves from the ground. And it's not out of the question that he would acquire a mining company that extracts the likes of nickel, which is intrinsic to the functioning of an electric vehicle battery. It's that level of extreme, which is the reason why I wouldn't put it beyond Elon to do something like that.
I'm sure that he would go to that level. I mean, the intriguing thing about the business models of Elon Musk is that he's gone against the grain of offshoring and offshoring for the sake of offshoring, whether it be to cut costs or just to get all kind of the nitty-gritty, dirty aspects of the business out of Western hands. And we've seen that really plaguing businesses with the supply chain nightmare that is happening now with COVID. And you're getting kind of an onshoring effect, particularly in the hardware industry. Industries are a bit less footloose. Musk has done the very opposite, right? I mean, he's taken all aspects of his business and vertically integrated them. And again, I don't think that's from a profitability standpoint, because in the short to medium term, that wouldn't have necessarily even been profitable for him. I think it's because he's a mission-driven guy, and he's trying to deliver a product that's, I suppose, American-made. But, he's not also governed by nationalism either. So he kind of, he treads the lines of onshoring, and also delivering a mission that's going to benefit society as a whole, which is something we haven't seen for a very long time.
Yes. No, I fully agree with all that you've just said. He does have suppliers, I've heard, a handful of suppliers, although that would slightly go against the grain in terms of being vertically integrated. He does do it as far as he can. Like I said, wouldn't be surprised if sort of in the coming months he would acquire Vale, which is one of the biggest miners in South America of nickel, which is really required for the functioning of an electric battery in a car. But also, back to your workforce point, I think that's a really good one. So he's built a factory in China, but make no mistake, that's for Teslas to be sold to Chinese customers. And yes, they will be built by Chinese people, but I think that's the right way to go about it. It's like native with native in terms of customer and workforce.
The workforce is going to understand the demands of the customer. The workforce is going to be the customer.
Exactly.
It's going to constitute the spending power of that nation and the end user ultimately. So again, I think I didn't know about that, but I think it's a shrewd move. It's probably quite an unprecedented move in the wake of normal business practices.
Yes. I think it's a healthy move because it makes sense to, I suppose, take into account and be sensitive of regional nuance. And probably the factory in China, the Tesla Gigafactory in China, will be, standardized to 99% degree, but then there will be Chinese flavors to it in terms of probably the way it's run and this is some of the finer points there. But yes, he's also building one in Europe, in Germany, I believe. So I think it's a healthy operating model he's trying to institute, in that he employs a local workforce and then the customer is also local. So that's really exciting. And then, on top of that, moving away from Tesla for a second, I mean, what he's doing with Starship, and I don't know if you've been watching some of these test flights, but the last Starship to be launched, and this is essentially the vehicle that is ultimately looking to take people to Mars, and this is the prototype. The SN15 model, which launched and actually landed vertically and performed these amazing maneuvers never seen to date, which is something they've termed the belly flop, where it literally sits down on its side as a cylinder and floats down before firing its three engines to vertically land itself. And this thing is 9 meters in diameter. And if you think about the tube, that is the shape of the rocket. And when you have the booster attached to the bottom of that rocket, which will essentially take it to orbit, that's the purpose of it. This booster, when the rocket is fully stacked, is 120 meters high and 9 meters wide. So it's a behemoth. It's higher and bigger and wider than the Saturn V rocket, which took the Apollo astronauts to the moon. It's just a marvel of engineering, and I can't wait to see that thing stacked. And I've made it a personal mission of mine to go out to Texas, to Boca Chica on the border of Mexico, and actually go and see that thing in person. Now, whether that's the fully stacked installation, that would be the dream, but even if it's this top half, that would be also just amazing.
That's incredible, brother. But the amount of energy as well for it to, conduct the belly flop.
Well, huge. The belly flop is a somewhat of a mundane maneuver in terms of energy, because what happens is it goes up to I believe it's 15,000 feet on a typical test flight, and there've been 5, 6, a handful of these test flights up until now, SN15 being the most recent, and it goes up to 15,000 feet, I believe, something in that region, don't quote me, and then it cuts out the engines and then uses fins on its side to maneuver aerodynamically into a belly flop maneuver, where if you almost imagine the cylinder falling on its side as opposed to vertically. So it's not falling vertically,
Glide
it's
maneuver.
falling on its side. Exactly. And it's actually quite a weirdly stable aerodynamic shape, a cylinder falling on its side. It's almost like if you were to drop the cardboard of a toilet roll. You can imagine that falls pretty uniformly and quite smoothly. It doesn't spin, it doesn't tumble too much. And to avoid any tumbling, it's got fins which auto adjust according to the gyroscopes inside, which tell it, give it details as to the orientation.
Yes.
And so it makes those micro movements as it comes down. And then only about 150 meters before the ground, it then fires the three engines to, again, push back into a vertical orientation before performing a vertical landing like the Falcon 9 boosters have done up until now. It's the same. It's an amazing maneuver to witness. I don't know if you've managed to have a look at it on YouTube or seen it anywhere.
I have not, but I'm actually going to save that onto my YouTube watch list so that I can actually see what it looks like in full.
Go into YouTube right now, actually, and just start looking. Type in SN15 landing, and I'll just talk to the folks for now.
Talk.
And I want to see. Yeah, I'll talk to the folks. You go ahead and have a look at that, and because I want to gauge your reaction live. Just let me know when it's up.
Alrighty, I'm just...
Okay. So anyway, SN15 was a step forward in terms of the technology used on the Starship. So this is a rocket that is planned to take people to Mars, will be the first vehicle that takes people to Mars. Now the next one, and also just the thing that amazes me, because you're used to creating rockets, I mean from NASA's perspective on the time scale of years and months.
Right.
They are creating new iterations of the Starship, or new SNs, so SN16 next, SN17 next, on the timescale of weeks. So that I wouldn't be surprised if, well, launch just happened. They launched it successfully and landed it vertically successfully just a couple of days ago. I wouldn't be surprised if 2-3 weeks from now, SN16 is on the launch pad ready to go for another test. Which is the iteration, because they're always creating. They've got a backlog, almost like a production line of these rockets, which are no mean feat. Like, these things are top of the range engineering in terms of what's possible with rocket science today.
And could you illuminate what the actual secret to the speed is behind the delivery from Elon Musk's SpaceX missions? Because it just seems like whenever this has been attempted by the public sector, by the governments of the US and Russia, the speed of delivery has been so slow.
It has been
with
so
almost
slow.
Elephantine kind of issues. And when it comes to SpaceX, it's almost like the blink of an eye. Now we're on the next revision. Oh no, now there's this problem, but we're currently rectifying that. Okay, now we're getting this new one up into space. What's this? I mean, I guess this is the secret sauce, right? But what do you think, Brother Bear, is the key to some of this speed?
Yeah, they've demolished these timescales. They've compressed them down to an atom. It's phenomenal. And I think the big part of it is Elon himself. And Elon hates meetings, for example. He will only ever do 5-minute meetings, and that's it. So I think it boils down to the micro level, such as that, the culture that's then spread and propagated without the company, as in maximum freaking efficiency, juice every minute of the day to its maximum. Don't have useless cozy meetings where no one's, you go in with a clear agenda. It sometimes boils down to the simplest things.
Yeah.
But I know meetings is one of his biggest gripes, is useless meetings. He cannot stand. He's allergic to them. So and I think that exists so prolific. That's so prolific in business, unfortunately.
That's such a great point, Brother Bear. Pause that there for a second, because honestly, the meeting, the meetings about meetings and PowerPoint about PowerPoint presentation culture, it is rampant throughout corporate culture across a lot of the Western world. And I think that the success behind a lot of the new Silicon Valley startup culture is that they completely eradicated those, 2-3 hour meetings where we're just talking for the sake of talking, to, assert some kind of authority, remind people of the supply of the chain of command. And as you said, kind of cozy meetings, everyone has a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, just talking about, how's the wife, how's the kids, how was golf. So much of that time could actually be transferred to productivity, maximum efficiency, kind of like having a hob on for 6 or 8 hours at high heat, as opposed to having it on for 10 or 12 hours at a medium heat.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. I mean, I think he's instilled this within his workers, and I think it's really percolated down into the culture of SpaceX and probably Tesla too. Just I mean, yes, meeting. It's almost juicing every second out of the people there, respecting everyone's time fundamentally, and just circling back every freaking second of that meeting back to what is the agenda? What are we trying to get out of this? Okay, we've only got 2 minutes left. Let's get it bottomed out. And if that means a bit of shouting and a bit of pushing and a bit more aggression, then fine. But like, we leave this meeting with what we intended to get out of it, for God's sake. And I think I'm getting a bit frustrated because I see it at work, right, where meetings are just put in for the sake of them, and what could have been compressed down to 5-10 minutes takes an hour.
Yeah, and I think many of us suffer with that. It's a kind of affliction in the corporate world. I suffer currently from the same frustration, and I think that kind of approach, getting meetings down to the very fundamentals. Okay, what do we want to achieve? Let's try and do this in 5 or 10 minutes. Will only feed into radical transparency as well. There's no time to mince your words. There's no time for fluff.
The niceties can fuck off. Seriously.
Yeah.
Just get on with it. Like, what do we need to get out of this? Let's get it, and let's get out, and let's get back to work. Because all too often, I hear people talking about how they haven't been able to do any work today because they're back to back in meetings.
Constantly. And that also, it's very, very common. Oh, I'm so busy. I can't actually do my job. Right. I'm incredibly busy. I was on Zoom.
Well, it's almost a point of pride, isn't it? Weirdly.
Now that's a very good point, and I think that's something Naval has brought up with his original domain name, idon'tdomeetings.com, or idon'tdocoffee.com. I can't remember what it was, but it was essentially, there's so much time wasted, and individuals in the workplace almost present themselves as harder workers because they're so busy, because they're so stressed for time. And it's like, actually, are you working smart, or are you just using hours of your time in meetings where nothing gets done?
Yes. And weirdly, like, it's completely unrelated. Well, related but not related. But in terms of character, people and who they are, worlds apart. It's Anton Creel. I've introduced you to him a while back. Okay, right.
Okay,
Liverpool.
right.
Okay, you need to take trains until Singapore, and don't stop taking trains until you're there. Okay.
It just doesn't make sense.
Okay, what are you doing? Okay, you're trading for time for nothing. Why would you do that? Anyway,
you're always talking shit on the phone.
You're always talking shit. Why are you looking at me like that? Okay, it's not okay. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, we love Anton Creel. Do have a look at him. It's a bit of an obscure reference. Apologies, but what I will say is that the man gives good advice sometimes, and in fact, more often than not, he does give good advice. And I link to Anton Creel because he talks about time. He talks about time. Time is increasingly becoming, obviously, the most important and scarce commodity that we all possess. Correct or not correct?
Absolutely correct, and Koresh.
God damn it. Well, it's true. It's true.
It's true because it's finite, Brother Bear. It's the ultimate finite commodity. And money, you can be high some years, low other years. There's so many tricks of the trade to make that variable fluctuate. But time is something that we all have a limited amount of. We have a day in the future that's going to be our last day, and I think it's a crying shame that more people actually prioritize money more than time in life, whether it's family, work, how they operate, how efficient they are. There's definitely, I would say, a muddling of priorities when it comes to time with money and possessions.
Yes. Time is finite, just like Bitcoin. Pow! I did the plug. But anyway, yes, it is. And it's the ultimate asset. It's the ultimate commodity. There is no greater, more valuable asset you will ever own other than your own freaking time. Your time is the most valuable thing you have in hand, so treat it as such.
Absolutely. And the beauty of realizing time as one of the most valuable assets that any human can own is that it actually contradicts the debt cycle, and it contradicts, the senseless chasing of possessions for the sake of possessions. I've understand that a lot of people get into a lot of debt, and that's why they're always so busy. They're always hammering away at jobs and new ventures, but again, they're never ever unlocking any new time. It's an incredibly valuable commodity. How would you say Elon Musk values time, Brother Bear, in terms of, beyond the meetings, of course, in terms of the way he governs his business?
Well, I will get to that in a second, and do remind me if I don't touch on it again, but just I don't want to neglect Paul Anton, who we've left on the bridge.
Oh yes, Anton, come back,
we're
Anton.
Sorry, we forgot all about you.
Sorry.
But
sorry. I was too guided by the Musk. I'm such a Musk rat.
No,
bring
you got
Anton
the whiff
back
of
on
the
the
Musk,
line.
and you couldn't stop, could you?
No. Please bring Anton back into the arena.
So sorry, come back on the stage. Anyway, so Liverpool. Just stop talking about Liverpool. Anyway, he Anton, the great.
Shut up about trains.
Stop! Just stop it. He's like, do you realise you could cycle from Liverpool all the way to Singapore without touching water? Hello. You can actually, if you go through the Channel Tunnel. It's possible.
No.
Without getting your toes
tell
wet.
me, this crazy hedge fund man. Tell me.
Anyway, so Anton, the great Liverpudlian who neglected and shat on his own town. Unfortunately, he did. That's what he did, and he did. Well, he did, and he also doesn't recommend mortgages. So don't ever get a mortgage unless you've created your dream life and created a company. That's easier said than done, obviously. So don't take Anton's word for it. We'll get to that on another time, and as to how you do that. But back to Anton and what he was talking about time. So he was talking about how he was. I mean, this is a very arrogant and almost a disconnected from a symptom of someone who's disconnected from reality at quite an extreme level. He was standing on London Bridge, and he was talking about. So there is a backhanded compliment and then a genuine compliment to come after this. So bear with us. He was standing on, I believe it was not Tower Bridge, London Bridge, the one that connects the city to the Shard. So London Bridge, correct. London frickin' Bridge. Anyway, he was standing there, and he was talking about how the workers, the suited and booted workers from the city, go one way at 8 a.m. and then are coming back across the same bridge the other way back to London Bridge Station, because it's something of a hub, and basically you can get anywhere from there at 6 p.m. So the same people are going there and back. Anyway, so he's saying, why are they doing this? They're trading their time. They're valuing their time at zero. Why? Well, they're valuing that time at zero because when at the end of the month, the day before payday, their accounts, more often than not, read zero. So all of your expenses, whether that was a mortgage, your liabilities, whether that's a car, whether that's your children, all of that, it ended up eating 100% of your salary. And it's often the case that people will stare back at a big fat zero. And he was talking about how your bank current account balance is a pretty accurate reflection of where you are. And so if that at the end of every month is reading zero, you've literally traded your time for zero value. Now, obviously, the devil's advocate there, and the truth, I'm not devil's advocate, take that back, is that you've managed to afford a lifestyle of one sort or another and supported kids, however many. So that there isn't zero value to it. However, what he's saying is that it's everything in and then it's all stripped out. And there's little, it's difficult to point to or grab what it's actually been spent on and how it's actually benefited you. It also hasn't afforded you any more freedom, because if it reads zero at the end of the month,
in a sense,
then money is freedom, right? In a lot of ways. And that's, yes. And it gives you options. It means you can workplaces you want to work. It means you don't need to work when you don't want to work, and it means you can start a venture if you so wish. So it affords you freedom in many, many ways. And so what he was saying was what I was just saying there, was that if it's zero, it's a big fat zero staring you back in the face after all of that, why, if you just worked fucking over 100 hours for that month for £0, $0,
pride comes into a lot of it. To be quite honest with you, Brother Bear.
And I think, sorry to interrupt.
Well, I just think the chasing of higher earning lifestyles. I mean, the point he's making is undoubtedly one I agree with, but obviously the money that's spent on those liabilities, you would hope that it's going into some kind of what would be an eventual asset.
Yes. Well, there's also lifestyle creep, which is
or
so
hedonistic
insidious.
creep, whatever. I think we were calling it that at some point.
Well, lifestyle creep, even if you look at through the microcosm of something like chocolates, which you're good with Cadbury's for a while, then you move to Lindt, then you move to Godiva, and then you move to William Curly. It's just, as a microcosm, that's kind of what's happening across the board. Is like what was previously great is no longer good enough, and it's that constant reaching for better and for more, and that's probably why we are where we are as a human race. It's probably why kind of our dissatisfaction with the current state of affairs means that we invariably move towards something and create something greater, which is not a bad thing. But in the immediate term, I suppose it does seem like the Ouroboros, so we are chasing our own tail in a sense.
Well, it's the insatiable desire, isn't it, Brother Bear? It's the human desire that brings us towards progress and innovation, but it's also the biggest thorn in our side, because it doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily tantamount to happiness and peace.
It isn't tantamount to happiness and peace, and if it's only affording you not being on the street, as in you're paying off all your debts and liabilities month on month, but you're ending up with zero, that can be something maybe of a depressing scenario. Now, I will caveat all of this with the fact that, he was looking at the highest, like, probably 2% of earners in the country by being in the city, like looking at those workers. So by insulting them and saying that what they're doing is insane and crazy, most of vast majority of the UK population and the global population for that matter have jobs. And many of people, I would say, I'd hazard a guess as the majority, do live paycheck to paycheck. And, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just is what it is. But I just wanted to moderate that view that Anton gave, because I think he comes from a place of privilege. He joined the right industry at the right time. He was making millions a year because of the bonus culture back in the early 2000s and the late 90s. So I think he comes from a world that is so ill represented and so not representative of reality.
He suffers from somewhat of a detachment, I suppose, from reality. One of the hallmarks of that is, you're never going to be rich renting out your own time. You're only going to be rich if you own equity or a sizable chunk of a business. Although there's a major amount of truth in that, and I'm sure Anton would agree with those statements, is that in reach to vast swathes of the general population? Probably not.
Well, yeah, it's a hell of a risk, and I suppose it takes many things to start your own company, create your own infrastructure out of nothing. So, yes, although that may be the dream for most, I think there needs to, ultimately, if you look at the economics of supply and demand, there needs to be enough consumers to consume the product, whatever that is. So I think there will always have to be a dynamic whereby there are more consumers than suppliers, obviously. So there is a limited number of spaces, I do believe, in the small business realm and business realm at large, because there can only be so many before the profitability of the whole is so diminished that it doesn't make sense to start at all.
a point whereby the train leaves the station, you mean?
Yeah, whereby any more businesses, as in a market is, I suppose it's what was referred to as market saturation, when market is so saturated that it's no longer competitive and profits are so marginal, they are not worth pursuing.
When you've got so many punters and competitors in one space, it becomes crowded, and the real
Yes.
gains have already been taken.
Yes, exactly, and there is a obvious movement, and I don't know whether how much you see this in Knot. It'd be interesting to know, but certainly in the UK, there are a number of companies that are trying to capitalize on this whole entrepreneurship thing and how sexy of an idea that is. So, not least Squarespace, who are a website developer, not dissimilar to Wix, and what they do is like it's a very sort of sexy and ad whereby you create your own brand, you create something, and this is the website provider that you should use, and they know by far and away that 90% of those businesses are not that they're going to flop, but they're 90% of them won't even get off the ground. They'll create the website and nothing will ever come of it. So they're almost milking more the idea of entrepreneurship than entrepreneurship itself, and I think that is where so much profit has been made off these lifestyle gurus, and it's the reason they are so dominant and so prevalent today, is that, crazily enough, okay, the best way sometimes to make money on YouTube is to make YouTube videos about how to make money on YouTube.
Yeah, it's so true. Or make YouTube videos about you observing other YouTube videos.
Yeah, and it's never about them giving the consumer of your course, your product, any value add. It's just about creating the illusion of what could be, whilst keeping, I suppose, pulling the wool over their eyes for as long as possible.
I think what we're seeing is kind of an evolution, though, of the tertiary sector. Because if the tertiary sector is inherently service-based, and it's all about delivering a service to the end user, the next extension of that is always going to be the selling of ideas. And I think that's what...
I love that. That's very insightful, I think.
I think it's a tipping of the scales further into the tertiary sector, whereby things can only become more meta. And I don't use that term in a pretentious way. I mean, in the way that you actually just mentioned, making money off how to make money on YouTube videos. And I think you can see similar parallels in the recruitment consultancy industry, where we get recruitment consultants for recruitment consultants.
Yes.
And yes, on top of that, Wix, Squarespace, these would be obvious examples of, milking the economy of ideas, milking essentially hype, which, as you and I both know, is what social media and 99% of the internet is built around.
Yes. No, it is fascinating, and it builds on something I think some people term the network effect, where you tell three people, those three people then each tell three people, and it expands on an exponential scale. That's what an exponential scale looks like in practice. So that's a lot of what underlies some of the push and the rampant, insane parabolic rises of some of these cryptocurrencies, or what people often term shitcoins, especially the Bitcoin maximalists who only believe in Bitcoin and Bitcoin alone, believe every other coin other than Bitcoin is a shitcoin.
Is worthless.
Is worthless. Yeah. And I think if you were to take that statement on face value, 90% of coins probably fit the bill. They are just there. It's insane. Like Dogecoin is worth 89 billion. It's worth more than General Motors. It's obviously it is not. It is just a purely speculative bubble. But there's no reason why you can't make money off a speculative bubble. And the reason Elon pushed that, going back to Elon, is not clear. And sort of people were thinking, including myself, that maybe he's playing a game of 3D chess with all of us, and we're ultimately unaware of the outcome he's angling for here. Self-interested or not, we're not sure, and it will kind of, everyone's in the dark, and everyone was actually on sort of tenterhooks as to whether he would mention Dogecoin in the SNL skit, and he did inevitably a couple of times. But in one of these interviews, in one of these little sections of SNL last night, he did say that when the guy pushed him, so he's like, "Well, so it's a hustle," and Neil's like, "Yeah, it's a hustle." So maybe it is as simple and just that. So maybe he did put a good amount of Teslas and his own cash into Dogecoin, pumped it through his clout on Twitter and elsewhere, and was able to profit off it. And I don't think that necessarily is a bad thing. He's just making use of the dynamics at play, particularly in this current crypto bull run. And I think half of the battle, if not more than half the battle, is understanding when you can leave a given coin and cash it in for something a bit more stable, whether that's something physical like gold or silver, or I think cash is no longer really a stable option. Cash is king. That mantra has been replaced by cash is trash, as coined by Ray Dalio. And I tend to agree with him, particularly with like we've spoken about this and touched on this point many a time. You don't get away with creating trillions of dollars out of thin air.
Once you do that, you're kind of doomed. You're setting yourself up for failure with the fiat currency. So definitely agree to the point that cash is trash, Brother Bear. We're seeing so much value being placed upon either cryptocurrencies or bearer assets in general, and these are often precious metals and commodities like copper. Copper especially, you've probably seen the price has gone absolutely through the roof, which is why we're seeing these.
Well, the other one I saw was lumber has gone just insane.
Lumber's gone mental. And of course, copper is a raw material in so much electronics. You've probably seen, Ford had to close down 2 of its major plants in Kentucky, which is unprecedented.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, all these whether it's supply chain scarcity or on one side, or government inflation on the other, cash is increasingly losing its value as a stable option. And I think it's great that people who have influence and money are recognizing that, because when people who have money and a say in the world, like Elon Musk, endorse these things, that's where it also derives value. And another level, really, Brother Bear, I think that people are removing their faith in elected officials more than ever. We saw this with the Trump effect. We saw this with Brexit. And it's being placed upon influencers, innovators, people who have actually worked for their value to society, whether that's Elon Musk or the CEO of Ford or whoever it may be. Maybe in a financial sense, these guys will be the new politicians.
I think that's a really astute point, because I think they almost already have more influence than politicians. Someone like Joe Biden, I don't feel his influence is felt as much as someone like Elon Musk, fundamentally, because they're ultimately in a different paradigm. The White House exists in an analog paradigm. Elon exists in the current and now digital paradigm.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Analog and digital, really. The White House and the institutions that surround it are quite, anchored by the ball and chain of old analog ways. Therefore, the individuals in that institution have less kudos in the financial realm. And again, coming back to the establishment, you look at, say, Bush, President Bush and his father, and President Bush's brother Jeb also almost became president. That's 3 individuals with the same last name. What are the odds out of 360 million people that just those 3 would have the same last name and all be related in that circle? So I think people are waking up to the fact, not to sound conspiratorial, but just practically speaking, Brother Bear, I think people are waking up to the fact that the establishment, whatever shape it takes, and this isn't a left-wing or right-wing thing, this has nothing to do with that, but the establishment in general doesn't have the public's best financial interests at heart. And what props up the establishment is fiat currency. So, Doge, Bitcoin, gold, whatever you want to, fill in the blank. This is really going to be the kind of next wave of where people start to store their value.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you speak about the Bushes, and you can look at them almost similarly to the Clintons as a dynasty. And it's not
royalty.
Absolutely, and royalty's perfect. It's not a million miles away from a monarchy. It really isn't. It's closer than you'd like to think and like to entertain. So it's scary in that sense. But technology, the rapid and ease of data transfer and absorption is just going to steamroll institutions like that are archaic ultimately and analog in their nature. So I think you're right. The influence, arguably, a number of actors already on Twitter wield more power on many levels, more than someone like Biden or the president of the United States, whoever that may be. So it's a really interesting dynamic that's at play. I think ultimately power is becoming ever less centralized. We're obviously seeing that. We're seeing a fractionalization of and breakdown and on a more individual level of agency and ability to express one's opinion. So it's maybe a truer manifestation of democracy, what we're seeing, because electing someone on one day and then that's your reality for the next 4 years maybe isn't as democratic as it could be.
I mean, we've had discussions about online voting and continuous referenda in the past. I think certain constitutions and models honor, regular referenda that allow people to dynamically adjust the legal system and adjust policies that affect their daily lives. Maybe what we're seeing now is, as we live in an age of infinite leverage through the internet, through digital currency, that the analog structures of government are no longer sound for human happiness. I think that at this point, the ground beneath our feet has drastically shifted, and whether that takes a form of Bitcoin and the blockchain in a wider sense, or just the influence that one individual can have over a platform like YouTube or Twitter, the analogous or analog-like structures of, say, the White House or 10 Downing Street seem incredibly outdated and undemocratic. These sort of archaic structures that no longer represent the people of a nation or a world anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Technology has come on leaps and bounds since those things were instituted hundreds of years ago. The assumptions and basis of which have long changed and are fundamentally now different. We're in a different paradigm, and those two paradigms are coming to a head. We know which one will triumph and which one is the future. I just hope the transfer of power and move from one paradigm to the next, from analog to digital, is a peaceful one from a political standpoint. Because the cadence of the public's engagement with political discourse is disengagement, and it comes few and far between in the form of a general election and the odd mayoral elections. And I think that's just crazy. So I think a lot of the political unhappiness and resentment towards the politicians themselves, these people, the politicians, aren't bad people. I think people are more angry at the system where they're not able to engage nearly as often as they'd like, but they're not even aware of that, and they're not aware that that's actually where their anger is coming from.
You said something very forgiving there, and I think that it shouldn't be left unnoted that these politicians that represent this system, they're not bad people necessarily. Well, some of them are, but I mean,
but it's more of the exception than the bad.
I would say so. I think the perception that all politicians are liars and philanderers is an erroneous one. What it comes down to is what they represent, the structures that they represent, deserves to now be in a museum, and it's not necessarily their fault. They are a product of their education and life aspirations. But unfortunately, we are now, and this has been accelerated by AI on so many different levels, we're on the cusp of that change. So we're seeing AI change ideas, displace jobs. We're seeing the new digital economy completely, basically, well, it's subverting the political system, but the structures are there clinging on for dear life. So unfortunately, the unfortunate individuals that are intertwined with those systems in our system, parliamentary, presidential, whatever, are now seen as outdated, archaic creatures with little interest in helping the public. But that's not always the case, right? That's not always true.
No, not at all. But I think it is true that politicians are dangerously misaligned and ill-informed of the latest and best of technology. And I don't blame them, because I think a lot of people in their 50s and 60s, which I suppose would be the demographic of the vast majority of politicians the world over, are somewhat alienated from, and it's none of their wrongdoing, it's just the way it is. It's the sheer pace of technology means that they're just not up to speed as to how to best leverage it, how to best, I suppose, angle themselves politically within this new technological technocracy, whether that's Twitter and these channels that exist now on YouTube. There are exceptions to the rule, such as the mayor of Miami. I believe it's Mr. Suarez, who is the mayor of Miami, and he almost treats Miami and lives and uses Twitter actively, and is almost more of a startup CEO in the way he acts than a politician. But those people come few and far between, and he's very much about attracting. He's all about cryptocurrency, and he's like, if someone hits him up from a renowned cryptocurrency and is looking at offices, he'll message them directly on Twitter and be like, let's go for a coffee. Like, that's the kind of politician we need these days. And that's only, I think, because, and maybe that will be the precedent, it's just taking time for the old guard to leave and these dinosaurs to move on and millennials to move into the power positions within the political structures. Maybe that's what needs to happen. I just hope that transfer of power is as peaceful as it can be.
It's inevitable, though, really, because as the old guard exits and retires, and the new guard comes in, any politician worth their salt will soon be expected to be up to date with why cryptocurrency, supersedes fiat currency. I think the only thing that holds, in general, I think we need to be moving towards these more dynamic political structures. But I think the only thing that holds back the specifically crypto revolution when it comes to government is the intrinsic self-interest of government to protect fiat currency through the central banking system.
Yeah, and there's no end knowing to what they might do to protect that. So that is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, cases or potential risks to Bitcoin, because I actually picked up a copy of The Economist. I'm not subscribed, but I did pick a physical copy of it just because of the cover, which was the Gov coins. So something we all know that governments will want to issue their own digital currencies. It won't be a million miles away. In fact, it will be very similar to what we've already got. Everyone uses internet banking, and it's just numbers on a screen. Most of those numbers, if not vast majority of them, don't exist in any physical form in terms of cash, let alone gold. So it's not that different to what they're looking to do. If anything, it will give them more agency about how many and ease in terms of how many units of that currency they create. So it's an article I'm yet to read, but it's interesting that these articles are coming thick and fast now across quite renowned and I suppose periodicals with a lot of good reputation.
And that's where I think the value is derived from, because if Bitcoin, like fiat currency, is a religion, in the sense that it isn't intrinsically valuable, but actually its value comes from, the whole public or global perception of it, then the more publications and rich people and productive and innovative people that actually endorse it, then soon it will be getting well, it will get closer and closer to replacing the fiat system altogether.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think it's almost well, for most people in the space, it's a foregone conclusion. I think politicians are slowly coming around to that idea. It's fundamentally a better system because it's a system based on equations and mathematics, and it's provable through mathematics, as opposed to some centralized legend that never sees the light of day. There's a mathematically provable public ledger. I think that's a far more attractive source of truth and sort of the substrate we all want our finances on, as opposed to something that's controlled by the hands of a few central bankers.
Definitely. I mean, I think that kind of system is going to be more transparent, less vulnerable to corruptibility. And at the end of the day, it's obvious that it's more democratic than something controlled by central bankers and government officials that at the end of the day are just humans.
Yes, and I think you're right, and I think that they're still a force to be reckoned with. Obviously, I'll take the example of the Tesla factory in California. So Elon Musk had a spat with a liberal politician, the name of which I believe escapes me now. Let's have a look at this. Lorena S. Gonzalez from San Diego. So I don't think that is actually the governor. California's governor, Gavin Newsom. Yes. So this was all around the coronavirus. So Tesla was asked to close in light of the coronavirus. I think Elon did close, but there was a point at which the numbers made sense for everything to reopen. It was also costing jobs and potentially people's redundancy and unemployment and all the rest of it. So he was pushing to reopen the factory. Because California didn't reopen the factory, or didn't allow any manufacturing to be reopened for that matter, inclusive of Tesla, Elon simply said, well, fine, noted. We'll be moving our factory to Texas now. And that's exactly what he did. So it's that power, not necessarily blackmail, but just power of industry to be as footloose as it can be. And it really will just gravitate to the geographies that have the most favorable policy. And that's been the case for some time now. But I think, again, it just speaks to the fact how actually politicians are becoming ever more disempowered, and it's the corporations, the entrepreneurs, the individual, ultimately, that's becoming ever more empowered. And it really is a case, I think, of power to the people over time.
What you've got there are two forces at work. One is an age-old force that even Karl Marx said would always happen, and that was that profit, or the agency of corporations, will always migrate to the geographies that are the most favorable. We saw that in offshoring. We saw that in the movement of capital to different parts of the UK in the Industrial Revolution. What we also see, though, is an unprecedented pattern that you've exactly hit the nail on the head with there, Brother Bear, and that is the fact that the power and the might of politicians and those existing structures around them are being dwarfed now by corporations. And I think that that's partly part and parcel of globalization and the trends that we've seen over the last 30, 40, 50 years. Mm-hmm. But this is kind of on a new level whereby even when government action is so stringent, the power of the digital economy, and we see this with labor being moved around as well through work-at-home structures, far supersedes anything that politicians can put in place. You'd need to have a very coordinated and authoritarian regime, closer to sort of a market socialist model, to actually restrain corporations in that sense. So we're seeing two things there, really. Something that's a continuation of history, but also an unprecedented level of the footloose nature of these companies.
Yeah, that's right. And I think cryptocurrencies at large will only serve to accelerate that dynamic, because as companies increasingly become denominated in cryptocurrencies, namely Bitcoin and Ethereum, they will not be, I suppose, as subject to the whims of government and their centralized currencies and the sanctions that may or may not come. So they can operate a lot more footloosely than they have already to date, and they are almost less incentivized to listen to the government, because the government ultimately will yield that much less power through it in terms of the ultimate even valuation of the company, in terms of what it's denominated in. And if a company starts to almost supersede its dollar assets in terms of cash with Bitcoin, they will, I believe, be ever less sort of influenced by political whims.
And I think that's a bright future, really, because that pushes decision making to a more kind of scientific, mathematical, impartial state of affairs. And I think you'd want something. I think that's more desirable than just being governed by gut feelings and visceral reactions to political stances.
Yes, and Elon is very much a man of the time in that sense, that everything is that much more data driven. Engineering and the STEM fields in general are that much more of a paramount importance, and it's a reason why they're being driven across multiple geographies as these subjects children should be focusing on. And I think it makes sense, and the learning to code, and I think the fact we have the wealth of data we do have now, it just gives us unprecedented, not insight, not even a best guess, but proof that this policy is the best policy to take, because the data tells us so. Not that it's the whim or a liberal or a conservative policy. The politics almost takes a back seat. It's about what the data's telling us, and you can't argue with that. And therefore, decisions are based on and made on more objective facts as opposed to the political whims.
And I think that there's definitely going to be something of a conflict or a war between that data-driven, predictive structure and the people that are desperately clinging on to extremes, particularly on social media. I think that we've seen the echo chamber effect writ large through different social media outlets. We've seen, the effect of people becoming more and more polarized. So I think that there's certainly going to be some conflict between that trend that we've seen, the hatred between disparate groups in politics, and ultimately the winning, and it will win because at the end of the day it's subjective data, the winning of a new data-driven economy and internet.
Yes, a data-driven economy that's underpinned by data, but really decisioned by something akin to an artificial intelligence, or exactly that, an artificial intelligence. And in most cases, I think around governments around the world, there's very few governments that would be able to govern better than a well-configured artificial intelligence that's based on raw data and real data and accurate data on the objective truth of a given geography and country. So you can't argue with something that's just has that much more computing power in terms of making the right decision. It's taking more variables and more accurate variables into account before churning out a decision that should be actioned by humans.
Certainly. Look at the crisis that the world has suffered from over the past couple of years with COVID. Imagine how much better we could have tackled it if we had...
That's an amazing example.
The word is predictive, right? No government on earth, whether it's the US government, the EU government, the Chinese government, can ever be as predictive as a well-informed, well-configured, well-shined AI system that's able to be predictive. And just think, if something can analyze historical data whilst dynamically measuring every variable, from the combinations of flu viruses we're seeing every year to the amount of PPE we have in the government closet.
Yeah.
Think of the predictive might that could happen there.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So
I mean, how many lives wouldn't like a global AI have saved if it were instituted or were in place? I mean,
how many lives, how many jobs, everything really. Just the
like
amount.
also a global AI that would be able to coordinate, these tribes that we call countries.
And these tribes that we call countries for centuries now have always been reactive, not proactive in their governance. It's always about reacting to a tragedy or a crisis, to best serve the people. Now, just think how much we could progress as a human race if we could be that bit more proactive. And
I know that's so true.
and actually, I think that would also iron out the creases of a lot of the political divides we see, a lot of the inequalities that we.
Yeah, and Leah, I feel like the rate of the AI development, if a pandemic, a global pandemic of the scale we've just seen, comes again, I'm going to put it out there and put my neck on the line and say it's never going to happen again. The reason being is the one we've just discussed, is that there will inevitably be an AI of sufficient quality and well configured enough to nip it in the bud before it even becomes a global pandemic. So to take this example, if there were something like that in place, it would have nipped it in the bud and it wouldn't have spread beyond a few streets in Wuhan.
Certainly, if it was in place, but again, it would have to be coordinated on a global level. It would have to see all the nations of the world agreeing on this system, and agreeing on its specific configuration. I think that would be the next hurdle. The first hurdle would be the initiation of that system, the creation of it. I suppose it wouldn't even be the second hurdle. The second would be its implementation in a group of nations or one nation. But to get it on a global level, that would give us that ultimate protection from a crisis like this getting to this magnitude.
Yeah, it would never go beyond a few streets, maybe let alone a few people. It might kill one person, if that. So it's just an amazing idea. I hope we get there. I think we can. I think the point of view I was putting across earlier was sort of naive in the sense that I was thinking once implemented, as opposed to all the hurdles needed beforehand, to vault over beforehand before getting to the point of implementation. But yes, I agree. It would have to be stringently approved, and if we're still in countries by that point, which more likely than not we will, it will require international effort to agree of the standards and parameters of that AI as to what is a pandemic and what's not, and what needs to be stopped and what's not. But it also could stretch beyond decisions just a pandemic. The use cases are almost unlimited.
Yeah. I mean, the pandemic is fresh in our minds, and it's a case in point. But absolutely, I mean, in terms of suggestions that could be made for a debate like gun control, all the way up to a trade decision between two different nations. There's the possibilities are absolutely endless.
Yeah, well, also something like preempting and stopping a gun massacre. Gauging the level of adrenaline in someone's body, and if they've got a gun and they're also not at a gun range, that's a bit suspicious.
Yeah, absolutely. Things like that, and of course this goes down another rabbit hole of how much privacy do we want to sacrifice for security and efficiency.
Well, look at this advent of Neuralink, right? That's what's that? It could be a device like that, and is that a mandatory thing, or is it optional? Could it be ever implemented? Would it need an authoritarian regime to implement it? I don't know. It's a very interesting space, isn't it?
Neuralink actually is something I've been meaning to ask you about for some time, Andre, and that's partly because I know Elon Musk has had an aversion to AI, or he's expressed caution, particularly with the algorithms on Facebook. But on the other end, he's created this product that is sort of the ultimate bionic extension of the Internet of Things. So tell me about Neuralink, Brother Bear, and tell me about, kind of very briefly, what you see Elon Musk's stance on AI and its role in society as.
Yeah, so I would say firstly that I'm not very well versed on Neuralink. I do know that they've done a number of tests now on pigs where they've implanted into a pig and they're able to capture the neurons firing when a pig smells something, and they're picked up visibly on a screen. So that sense of smell is picked up through the neurons of the pig, captured by the Neuralink device, and then uploaded onto a screen in real time. That's quite amazing. And its initial use case. So I wouldn't convolute AI with what Neuralink is. Neuralink isn't fundamentally AI in any way, shape, or form. It could potentially in a future generation or version of Neuralink be interfacing with an AI or have some AI implanted, but in its current form it's just there as a detection method of neurons being fired, and it can, I believe, stimulate neurons with the wires. Its application initially will be, from a human perspective, quadriplegics and people with severe disabilities, hopefully enabling them to restore some use of their limbs and potentially being able to walk and operate like a normal human being, which is a pretty inspiring use case. And then if we can look beyond that, it would probably be something like enhancement of our ability to remember, our ability to recall, and I suppose our ability to concentrate, that sort of thing. So almost like an enhancer, an accelerator of our innate abilities.
So sort of bringing, I suppose, not to tout the AI line again, because it sounds like it shouldn't be convoluted with it, but enhancing something that we can already do using technology to do that, whether that's sort of bringing more clarity on different senses, or if not that, then actually helping kind of, I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but healing the sick and bringing, bringing life to people who've suffered terrible ailments.
Yeah, exactly. And I think he says by far and away those will be the priority people, and I think it makes sense because it's those people that need it most in a lot of ways. So that makes sense. I think as it stands, I believe the procedure is that they would drill something like the penny-sized shape, a hole in your skull, take out that piece of bone, implant the device with the wires, which are almost as thick, well, thinner in some cases than a human hair, and they would interact with the appropriate parts of the brain, and that piece of skull would then be put back in, and you'd be none the wiser as to whether someone was Neuralink enabled or not. And it's going to be a slow process. There's a hell of a lot of regulation and hurdles to cross before it's implanted in the first human being quadriplegic who they will endeavour to restore some function to. So I think it's going to be a slow process, lots of regulations, lots of bills to be passed, and it's probably a legal minefield. So it's going to take a while. We're going to see it coming. It's not going to be a surprise. Like, you're not going to turn up at the dentist and be like, "Oh, would you like the Neuralink today? We're offering it on a half price."
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not going to happen like that. I don't think it's going to be slow coming. We're going to see it coming, and it's potentially, I can see a lot of people, if the benefits are well demonstrated and proven, quite a few people being interested in improving their faculties in terms of recall, memorization, all sorts of abilities. I mean, if someone were to tell you it would boost your IQ by 50 points, that's a pretty tempting offer.
I think a lot of people would snatch that up if they were able to. You know, the possibilities that you can achieve with that would be brilliant, and opportunities in terms of lifestyle choices and jobs and relationships and everything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very exciting possibility. It carries a lot of controversy with it, but most of the exciting revolutions do, don't they?
Yeah, they do, exactly. And it's these preposterous ideas, I think, that Elon's unafraid to tackle, and some of his solutions to at least the the detractors at first are crazy. But I'm always reminded of that quote by Albert Einstein, which says, if an idea isn't at first absurd, there's no hope for it. And I think that's so true on so many levels. Sometimes it's the craziest ideas, like the Robin Hood idea that you pitch to the millennials who have no money to trade on a commission-free trading app, and it's a wild success, but including something like back to Musk, like landing rockets vertically, like it's trying to drop a matchstick and land it on its tip. How do you do that? It's a problem that's harder than that. Something like the fact that his latest endeavor in terms of this massive rocket, Leo, that's going to take humans to Mars, hopefully, that booster, when it comes back to Earth, which takes the rocket to orbit, but then comes back and lands itself, apparently there's going to be a tower with almost like a claw that the rocket doesn't land itself, but is caught by this massive mechanical claw.
That's amazing.
Yes.
That's so cool.
I know.
And for the record, I did actually watch the SN15 landing, and it was incredible.
Did you watch it?
Yeah, I watched it on mute while we were talking, and I've never seen anything like that before. You usually imagine the landing of a spacecraft as this sort of sloppy, very gradual happening, whereby it ends up with a load of debris in the ocean and people scrambling about with parachutes.
Yeah.
But that was very very streamlined, very slick, almost frightening. It was so good.
It's amazing, isn't it, the first time you see it? And also the way the rocket is coming down on its side horizontally, and then reorients itself super quickly by firing those rockets and lands vertically.
I suppose it's almost like this piece of technology is a sentient being in its own right.
Yeah, it's so able. You never see a rocket that agile, especially able to move that quickly. It's amazing what he's done. It's one of his crowning achievements, I'd say, in the rocket space, because the biggest problem for the longest time was, and the holy grail for rocketry, was reusability and rapid reusability. That's been the holy grail for the longest time, and he's managing to do it. There's even a Falcon 9 booster that's now being used for the 10th time, and all they're having to do is refuel it, which is the way it should be, because the way the paradigm worked previously, the dynamic was, the moment the rocket fueled, it had to be repaired. It took restoration. For example, the boosters on the space shuttle, it took months, potentially years. So it's the equivalent of creating or building a new 747 jumbo jet and then taking it apart when it lands at its destination after the first flight. It's just insanity. So rapid reusability for the longest time has been the holy grail, and I think he's getting there. He's definitely got there with the Falcon 9. Now it's about doing it with this bigger rocket that's supposed to take people to Mars, and he's saying he's as ambitious as it literally should be, that it lands, but with the claw then puts it back on the launch pad, and it's fired up with fuel, and it's ready to turn around in an hour to go again, which is just an insane, like, that's sort of the timescales you talk about on a Ryanair flight, but he's trying to do that with a rocket, and it's just it's unprecedented. But I don't have many doubts. I think he can do it,
and I think he's right there, that you see what's possible when you don't have meetings so long.
Exactly. This is what's possible with 5-minute meetings. Get it done.
You could just say that at work sometimes. Guys, watch this video of the belly flop. Watch this video of an SN15 refueling in an hour. This is what's fucking possible if we don't spend 2 hours talking about something that could be talked about in 10 minutes.
People are going to be terrified tomorrow, Monday morning, when I come into I'll come in with a new aggression into meetings. Like, Andre, is everything okay? Just get it done, okay?
Get it done.
This short. I'm going to cut all of my meetings to 5 minutes.
Yes. And as you leave the room, you just scream Dan Pena quotes as well. You should have slid down your brother's fat leg.
Look at you. Look at you.
What have you done? What have you done?
You're pathetic.
And then just do a little plug for Jason Capital as you leave. None of your ideas.
Go for it. Do it.
Align.
Jason Capital.
Jason Capital. I used to be like you.
But what Musk is doing is truly amazing, and it is tremendous. And I just hope he's around as long as possible, so he sees the fruits of his labor, because I think he's so core to that team. It's not like you could swap him out tomorrow. He's a unique character, the like of which we're not going to see for a very long time.
He's one of a kind, and he's irreplaceable, and he has gotten to that point by just being himself.
Absolutely. Brother Bear, we're going to close it there. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed that one.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. It was a trip as always. Kudos to Mr. Musk, and kudos to you for dedicating a podcast to him, sir.
Gracias, señor. Arrivederci.
Arrivederci. Pow pow.